Hello, everyone, and welcome to the very first episode of DAO Today. I'm your host, Aleksa. In today's episode, our guest is the OG of the space, EagleLex. Hi, Eagle. It's great to have you here.
Hi, Alexa. Thanks for having me. I'm very happy to participate at this first episode. So, I'm a lawyer and a law professor at a university, European based, and I work in crypto since 4 years at an academic level, but 2 years as a practitioner. I was active at the beginning in big DAOs as Bankless DAO and Aragon DAO. Then I began to advise predominantly DeFi projects in the space that also want to decentralize. And so it's a path that I've followed several times and with also different legal solutions. And as an academic, I try always to be up to date with respect to the new laws that are enacted and to the legal problems that arise for DAOs. And so I'm happy to talk about this with you, Alexa.
It's great to have you here. I'm really looking forward to this talk. And could you please share with us what are some of the common challenges that you encountered while working with us?
So I think that there are two main problems that can be addressed in different ways, and that also, let's say, are much or more problematic for some type of DAOs than others. And these two problems are mainly, first of all, practical in nature, which means having contacts with the off-chain world. We work only online. We have our social networks, our toolings to take decisions. We have the governance tokens. But of course, like to run a business, to run an enterprise, you need also to have a proper banking. Sometimes you need to enter into contracts with people. You need to pay taxation, depending on the jurisdictions, of course. And so there are this practical issue that after a while arise. Not always from the very beginning, because what happens is that sometimes people do not really care about these problems at the beginning. They start doing things through different members of the DAO. For instance, one person has the domain, one person has the contracts with the social media. But after a while, you notice that it's not the proper way of doing things because people cannot remain stuck within a DAO because it's not correct. Like to have contracts, which basically are contracts that are there for the DAO, which are concluded by another person. And so these practical difficulties a lot of times bring to the decision of setting up a legal entity. And this is like one of the legal challenges. The other legal challenge, which is huge, depending in some cases when the activity of the DAO can be dangerous for its members, is the liability. Because DAOs as such are only collections of individuals. Now, if we take away the technology, which is of course important in DAOs, we have persons that engage together and that normally provide a service to the external world. And this is problematic because some issues concerning liability may arise. If, for instance, the DAO harms other persons, it can happen, for instance, with a hacking that involves the smart contracts that are deployed by the DAO as a protocol. And in this case, of course, issues may arise with respect to the people that are contributors of the DAO. Are these people liable or not? And the response should be yes, according to the majority of the laws in the world, and of course, according to US law, which is the benchmark that is often taken into consideration if US people are part of the organization. And the law that applies is the law of partnerships, which means that basically every member is jointly and severally liable for what the DAO does. And of course, you can imagine if this kind of liability involves possible damages plus also taxes, this can be very problematic for the members of the DAO. And this is why basically legal challenges arise. Now, it would be naive to say that the legal challenges are the only challenges of DAOs. Of course, DAOs are very young and there are a lot of different problems that they are tackling. There is a lot of research going on, and I think it's fascinating to see how basically starting with the end of 2020, how much things have changed so far, and how many problems were addressed, not only at a legal level, but also at a, let's say, community level, business management level, by people that basically work in DAOs. And in this regard, I want to mention one very important organization, which is called DAO Research Collective, which basically works in different types of on different topics concerning DAOs, not only legal but also organizational, governance, and the ethos that these groups follow is pretty much related to the creation of public goods. And this is very good for people that want to create a new type of organization. But I mean, when you read these resources, you have immediately the feeling that the problems are big and solutions are not always there. And so people have also to think always about something new. And from a legal perspective, it is important, first of all, to understand like which is the matter, and so understanding also what a DAO is from a social and from a technological point of view. The legal comes sometimes afterwards, because you have to understand which is the best solution for a DAO. If the activity is risky, I advise to start before with the legal problems, because they might be very difficult to solve once the DAO is created.
That's a great point. I mean, in my experience as well, many founders leave the legal for the very end, or they put it pretty low on the priority list without taking into consideration potential legal consequences they may experience down the road. And when it comes to projects that do not have that legal wrapper, where when they do not have an entity representing the DAO, can you share a bit more? What type of liabilities do these founders or developers may take on if there is no entity involved?
So I want to say one thing in advance. Of course, this is the main problem if the DAO is a so-called protocol DAO. So an organization which is built basically around this protocol, which is governed by a DAO. In this case, I think that it is very important to secure the position of the developers. And I intend the developers in this scenario as service providers to the DAO. So they are part of the community because they provide a service which is the most important service. It is the maintenance and the development of the protocol, which is also the tool that lets the DAO survive, that gives value to the DAO. I think that the person must be seen as a service provider, which is wrapped in a legal entity, which can be any sort of legal entity. It can be also a company, a normal limited liability company, and this organization should be external to the DAO. The problem is that, of course, you cannot achieve this result immediately, and so you need to create a path towards decentralization. And what is important is that these people that begin to create the technology are immediately protected through a liability shield. Once they are protected, they begin to create the technology, and then it is a matter of creating a right DAO, creating an organization which is truly decentralized and which is separated from the developers. So I make an example. For instance, the developers can create a company. This company gets funded in order to create a technology. Sometimes it gets funded where if a fundraise is made, sometimes developers develop without, let's say, having external resources. Once they are ready to deploy, and then you have to implement a DAO organization, and this can be done in several ways. I'm not so much a super believer of the DAO legal wrapper. It is something that can be done sometimes, but it is not necessarily needed if you are sure to get a very decentralized community. And in fact, we have different models, and it is also possible to imagine the DAO as something which exists only on chain and which has the service providers that give that offer some services to the DAO. In this way, you can have, for instance, a company that does marketing, a company that does the development, a company that does the operationals. And an example for it is, for instance, Aave. Aave is an example of protocol DAO, which has a company setting that is not connected to the DAO. If the company Aave, based in the UK, needs something from the DAO, from the resources of the DAO, it must make a proposal as every member of the DAO as such. But this is a very mature system, which is also difficult to achieve. It's not like the easy solution for everyone. And so it is advisable that sometimes you solve these problems of liability, especially if you don't have a truly decentralized community, in adopting a legal wrapper, which then is someone who basically, it's a legal entity that is responsible for the protocol and for the services of the DAO. And this is something which avoids that the liable persons are the founders, the developers, the persons that are the main contributors to the organization.
Given that DAOs as decentralized organizations pose quite of a challenge for regulators, do you think it's possible to regulate DAOs as DAOs? So far, we do have several countries such as Wyoming and the Marshall Islands that do have a regulatory framework for DAOs. However, it's not flawless, but of course, it's a step forward. What do you think? Will we be able to have a good regulatory framework for DAOs on a global level? Is it possible?
So, to be honest, I'm not a super believer of DAO legal entities, and I find the US models very interesting because they try to implement an innovation at the legal level, in looking also what the technology is, how the technology looks like, and this is, I think, the interesting part for an academic in looking at the regulations of Wyoming, of Vermont. Now there is also, not now, but like some months ago, there was also a new legislation in the Marshall Islands. The limit that I see is that, of course, if you choose a jurisdiction, and if you basically are saying the DAO belongs to this jurisdiction, you are you are eliminating one of the main aspects of the DAO, which is the decentralized nature, the fact that it's basically global and that everyone can join. You are creating an entity which belongs to a particular state, and that's a bit the limit that I see there. But of course, it depends a lot on the type of DAO that you want to create. We are talking about different types of organizations. Sometimes the DAO is just a collection of 15, 20 persons. Sometimes it is a collection of 1 million people spread all over the world. And so it can make sense to have an LLC which is shaped as a DAO in Wyoming for a DAO which is predominantly US based, because you have a lot of advantages in terms of possibility of having banking. Also, the rules concerning taxation are clear. You know what to do. You are recognizable from the external. What I see is that very broad DAOs do not follow this path. And I think that it is related to the fact that you basically oblige the digital organization to be stuck into the limits of a jurisdiction, which is of course something that goes against the ethos of DAOs. And the prevailing models are at the moment foundations, the idea that you create a kind of public good with the DAO, and that the DAO is something which does not really belong to some particular individual, which are the shareholders in a normal company. And some prominent examples are the Cayman Foundations. It's very known model of the Cayman Company Foundations. What I see is that basically the DAO, the legal entity, becomes a kind of off-chain arm of the digital organization. It is there in order to fulfill practical needs, and also in order to limit the liability of the members. Although one has to say that it is not 100% sure if these entities are capable of limiting the liability of the contributors in full. This is true for foundations. It is also true for trusts. There is a lack of case law, and so we don't know. We hope that they cover the liability, but of course, some risks remain, and therefore one has really to think about it, whether it is necessary to have this kind of entities. My feeling is that more and more DAOs are trying to follow this path, especially if they fulfill a service and activity which may endanger the contributors. For instance, managing tokens through smart contracts. Everything is automated. Sometimes people do not even have admin power to influence, to impact on the smart contracts, but nevertheless, there is the fear that people that develop the technology may be impacted by liability issues if there is, for instance, a hack.
Great, thank you. And like considering all this, if you incorporate the DAO as an LLC, right? So then we have an issue because the DAO assets are not of the DAO anymore, right? So they belong to the LLC. If we take, for example, like Wyoming model of a DAO LLC, again, it's not great. It has many limitations, and it does not really agree with the nature of the DAOs. And having said that, like what are the DAO chances of actually being able to communicate with the traditional world? Earlier, you mentioned that that's one of the, to say like the flaws, like the fallbacks of a DAOs, because they are just not able to compliantly communicate and collaborate with the off-chain world. So, what do you think? What can be uh, kind of like a middle ground solution to that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Difficult to answer. I think that like my feeling is that this LLC model cannot so much work because like imagine that you are an Italian. I mean, why should I become a member of the LLC? It's something which perhaps I don't want to do, even though I want to be part of the DAO, and so you basically transform something which is really understood for being borderless to something which has clear borders. And this is why I think like offshore entities are gaining so much traction, because like if you incorporate offshore, basically you know that this entity does not belong to everyone. It's something which is in this very particular jurisdictions that have some, let's call them relaxed rules, and so nobody feels really a citizen of Cayman, and so you put like the entity in heaven, and this is something which, to be honest, works for DAO. Some people think that it is not good for taxation reasons. Others may argue that in reality, like these organizations do not really right now create value off chain, and given that they do not create value off chain, it could be also seen as proper that they don't pay taxes to a particular country. Given that then the contributors that earn from the DAO, they of course are obliged to pay taxes in their nations. What I can say also to this problem is that, of course, like we have in mind always the most critical example of the protocol DAOs, where all the contributors are in danger of liability. But a lot of DAOs are in reality only social formations of people that engage and that may fulfill practical needs. One example is the Bankless DAO, like the DAO which I am mostly bound to. In reality, this kind of organization could incorporate in 1 second an association, a non-profit association, which would be able to cover all the problematic aspects that I've said. For instance, having a banking account, having relationships with other parties. Uh, to me, like it's impossible then to have a really wrapper that wraps the entire DAO. So I imagine that there will always be a kind of separation between what is digital and what is off chain. But I think that it's not so problematic if you consider that basically you create the off chain entity only to fulfill certain tasks. And so if this is done and you can do the rest on chain, then I think that this might be might be a workable example. And the other thing that can be done to address this problem is creating like sub entities. I'm sure that you're aware about this. Very also, the public is aware about this ongoing uh, debate on sub DAOs, like the creation of sub organizations within a bigger DAOs. I have to say that I'm not aware about real like success story. I think it's normal because people are experimenting. But if you choose this kind of sub DAO structure, you can also imagine that you have a sub DAO which is wrapped, or different sub DAOs that are wrapped, and then a overarching organizations that basically has the power as the main governance center to address the activities of this sub DAOs, which can be wrapped in different legal entities. And so I think that one has to abandon a bit the idea that the legal entity is a wrapper of the entire DAOs, and it is possible to solve problems with smart solutions where you create like smaller boxes that fulfill this off-chain tasks which needs to be fulfilled without impacting on the entire DAOs. The problem here is, of course, that you create a kind of break in the governance system. Not everything can be off chain. You need to have people in which you trust that then fulfill what is the decision of the DAO. But we see this all the time. It's not like the automation, the autonomous, which is in the acronym of DAOs, is something which I think most of the times is only in the name. Like DAOs are digital organizations, but automated, this is a bit more, let's say, challenging to achieve. What is sure is that they use smart contract technology, and they are based on chain, and they take decisions through these technologies. But then saying that it's completely autonomous is, I think, wrong for the majority of the organizations.
I mean, it's difficult for DAOs to balance out, right? I mean, that off-chain legal entity helps mitigate the risks, right? Like, from the developers and everyone involved, and understanding like where to pay taxes and to limit the liabilities of the developers, of the contributors. But then again, what are the consequences for the
Yeah,
on-chain
this is a great point,
organization?
Alexa. It's a great point, and here I think we can really begin to speak about the first word in DAOs, which is decentralized. Because one possible solution is really achieving a level of decentralization in which it is impossible to refer the organization to a given jurisdiction. And this is something which is made, and it's difficult because decentralization is something which exists in the DAO research, but it's not a legal concept right now. I think that the effort of legal scholars, but also practitioners, should really be understanding what decentralization means. There are some very good articles. I want, for instance, mention an article of Gabriel Shapiro on decentralization, because if you achieve this level of decentralization, then it would be impossible for a jurisdiction to claim that the entity needs to pay taxes in a given jurisdiction. I'm not saying that it's an evasion of taxes, because of course, like the contributors that get paid from the DAO, they will pay their taxes. Or if you invest in a governance token, you have to pay taxes if you have a capital gain. But I don't think that the fact that a digital organization which is completely decentralized doesn't pay taxes is something which should shock us. In the end, if the organization does not create value or does not take advantage of a particular jurisdiction, then I think it should be accepted by the by the law that it doesn't pay taxes for a jurisdiction. In this regard, I want to mention a project, which is the project provided by an international group, the Koala Group, and they framed a series of model rules on DAOs. And their idea, which now seems a bit utopistic, but I hope that in the future it could be accepted, is the fact that DAOs should remain some like international entities that are recognized by the different states. So not corporations that are in one state, as for instance the Wyoming LLC, but they should remain like international and global, and that the state states should recognize these stages. And then if you accept this idea, then like these entities are pass-through entities, and taxation goes to the members. It's not like a matter that must be dealt by the organization as such. I think that this could be a solution for the future, but of course you need this high level of decentralizations, because otherwise it becomes just like a way of avoiding taxation duties, and this is not something that we want, and that can be achieved only for organizations that are truly decentralized.
Tell me, like in that case where you have a fully decentralized organization, internationally recognized, where only the contributors are paying the taxes. But do you think that in that case we would need some sort of like a centralized place where it would say like the contributors, people that are on the payroll of the DAO, are these, and they're paying taxes here and there, but the organization itself is not. Because like what I'm seeing, I think that idea would absolutely be great if doable, but the question I think would remain: how would one ensure that the contributors, the developers are recognized by different jurisdictions in order to pay taxes and to be seen as the initiators, as the team members?
That's a great question, because here we have two different theories. And what I've said, of course, is beautiful, but there are
Yeah, it's
there are some
definitely
risks
an
that
amazing idea.
you are saying, okay, Francesco, decentralization, fine. But then, I mean, we have always the feeling that there is like a central decision which is taken by some members of the organization, which often are the multi-signers, so the people that basically have the treasury, that control the treasury of the organization. And to solve this problem, like you create a kind of central point sometimes, which is the foundation, as I've said before, because like if you do it on the Cayman Island, taxation is zero, and so you solve this problem in putting your centralized point in a jurisdiction which is not taxed. And another theory is the fact that like perhaps you have a multi-sign, but where you have different people from different nationalities, or you have operations, smart contract operations, which are completely automated. And so basically starting from the vote of governance token holders, which are spread all over the world, these decisions can be implemented directly without like the recourse to persons which sign a transaction. And so like if the procedure is really automated, and it relies on a decision which is taken by millions of people all over the world, or thousands of people all over the world, then I think that it could work. But in between, there are a lot of nuances and different types of solutions that one can have. What I can say to conclude is that if you have a multi-sig in which you have your treasury in, and you have, I don't know, 7 people that sign the transactions, it might be dangerous. In looking at the background of these people, it could be said that the organization must be referred to the jurisdiction of one of these people that are holder of the multisig. And so I think here the organization need to be smart to avoid that these persons can have problems in their own jurisdictions, because of the fact that, as I've said before, if partnership law applies, then there is the risk that these people are jointly and severally liable, so that they pay entire taxation for the DAO, and this would be really, really weird. So far, we don't have cases of this type. I think that taxation authority, they need also to a bit understand which is the legal landscape, and for now they are not addressing the issue directly. But
Yeah,
it's
I
a
mean,
topic that need to be solved in the future, of course.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think like DAOs as a structure are generally quite still young, and it will take time for even the people that are in the space building DAOs to understand the decentralization itself, and then of course the regulators like the tax offices, etc. It's gonna take them probably a bit longer. And the general like DAOs do face that when they need to understand like what to balance, right? Like to get to be legal compliant and become centralized, or to go towards decentralization, but then they're risking a lot when it comes to the off-chain world. Talking about that, what do you think? Since we established that DAOs do face some centralization challenges off chain, and what do you think? Do similar issues appear on chain as well?
Yeah, I think that this is a problem which is strictly related to the governance models that DAOs may adopt. That's another interesting topic because, like the legal professional, he cares, of course, about the corporate structure and the legal entities. But of course, I think that you cannot advise in this sector if you're not aware about the different governance models that you can apply. And also here, I think that we are in an early stage because the governance is mostly based on the amount of tokens that the different token holders have. So the members of the DAO basically participate, and depending on how many tokens they have, they influence more the decision-making process within the organization. And this means that the risk of centralization is absolutely there because we have lots of whales are out there. We have the founders, and so we have people that might actually influence strongly the outcome of a vote. Sometimes governance systems put also barrier in the possibility of proposing votes. And another problem is that the participation to this on-chain votes is very limited. So a lot of people are simply holder of the tokens without voting. And if you put all this together, you have really a sense of centralization. Like you have really good people that are aware about all the nuances of the DAO, that are able to frame proposals that will be accepted because they are so prominent within the organization. And then you have also this token voting, which of course works within a certain extent, because if you have big whales that want to influence the voting, they're able to do it in this kind of scenario. And so I think that governance is something which needs to be addressed carefully at the very beginning. But it can be always ameliorated. So my advice is, okay, you have this governance system set up, but it's something which you learn within the organization. Also in Bankless, we've seen, for instance, that some thresholds that we have put did not work. And then it means that you have to change it. You have to promote a vote that basically implements a more mature governance system. And some DAOs has also implemented systems to resist for attacks which are provided by very big whales or token holders, or that are limits the power to influence a vote uh, by by whales. And so there are some rules that you can implement in the governance systems in order to avoid centralization, which is what everyone does. Of course, like there is always a drawback. So if you have a system which is really completely decentralized and in which all the decisions are taken through voting, then you slow down a bit the pace of your organization. And so I think you have to balance a bit the needs of your organization with the needs of decentralization. And the best way of doing it is creating a flexible model. I mean, saying flexible is always a bit suspicious because it does not mean anything.
Yeah,
I
and
think
can be abused as well, right? Like,
flexibility. I mean, and this was also one of the starting problems of the DAO. I will try to be more precise. I think that some issues needs to be decided on chain, and it must be clarified in a kind of constitutional document. I'm more and more inclined to think that you need to have like a set of rules, which then will also, to the external world, indicate how mature your community is and how really decentralized the community is. And so I would separate like some tasks which can be done at a level which does not require a vote by people that are contributors to the DAO, that have demonstrated in the past that they really care about the organization, that they know what they do, and which basically had a legitimation which was given by the community as such. But then there are matters which are of capital importance, which normally are related to the payments, to the use of the treasury, which must be given to the broader community.
For sure. I mean, we go with the assumption that the founders do have the necessary expertise to bring the project vision to life and to support the daily operations of the project. And of course, each and every member of the community cannot have all the necessary expertise to make the good decision. However, if we approach it like as such, then we risk high level of centralization because we are entrusting a small group of individuals that we believe to have that needed expertise. However, DAO is built on a complete opposite principle where the decision making power is with the community, and the community is the one that does make those decisions. But we have a problem there as well because many projects, many founders, many great founders are experiencing issues with the community involvement and how involved and how engaged the community is in the project. And it can get quite difficult to have that community involved and be present on community calls and make sure to stay informed on what's happening with the project. Come and vote when it's needed, and vote based on the education they received and the information they received, and based on that further of course make an educated decision and the vote. And another issue that does happen in DAOs are the whales. We hear a lot in the space about whales this, whale that. They're not very much liked, right? And recently we had an issue with a whale who basically voted on a proposal and and changed the whole governance by themselves, and that sparked a lot of talks. And again, we went back to distrust towards DAOs and, of course, towards whales. What do you think? Can we and should we prevent the whales? Should we have some sort of like a total cap on a vote? So a whale, one person, does not have the power to change the whole governance by one single vote, basically.
Yes, I think it can be a good idea, but one has also to be careful because, like, the way there's a person that believed in your community. If he has all these tokens, then it is something. It means that he has invested in the community. And like, if you limit too much, of course, people will not. If these people are interested in governance, they will not be inclined in being holder of the tokens. What I would implement is really like understanding, indicating which are basically the goals of the DAO, and uh, trying to understand when the behavior of a whale is a behavior which is detrimental to the DAO. And here I want to discuss the problem also of justice within Web3 and within DAOs. And there are some very interesting projects which also want to bring justice within these systems. And I want to mention here the project Curia of my friends of LexDAO. And it's a very good example because it presents the justice system not only as something which is for two counterparties that perhaps have a problem within a contractual relationship, but also as something that will need to be implemented within broader communities. And so if you see that there is a problem with the whale, I think that we can use legal tools as mediation and as judiciary to solve these problems. And because if the whale votes, and the vote is something which is aligned with the interest of the community is fine. But if we have situations in which we have 90 persons that vote in one direction and the whale in the other direction, then I think that this clash needs to be solved by an internal decision-making process, which is kind of independent than the governance system. And so I think we should not have fear to introduce this kind of toolings within broader organizations, because it's a sign of matureness. And it would also eliminate this problem of limiting the governance power. Some people do not like this basically attribution of power to an external actor, but I think that there are people that are really trustworthy in the industry. It is a bit introducing a human factor within the DAO management and governance, but I really invite persons to look at Curia and to and also understand that it is possible to solve issues which are internal to a community and delegating to people that basically are trusted within the industry. I think that's a very good idea, because what is really, really bad is when a community basically overturns a vote which was impacted by a whale. So a decision that was taken by a whale is not implemented for the benefit of the community. We have seen this happening in the last months. I mean, people were always against the whale, and I think that's normal. But I think that this is really a demonstration that the governance systems were not ready to tackle this kind of situation. And so I think that in these cases you can stop the whale with a kind of challenge, which is provided by the rest of the community. Mediation, judiciary can be, of course, like a kind of on-chain judiciary can be a tool to solve this problem.
Those are pretty interesting mechanisms that we could use to potentially solve these whale and other centralization issues. I mean, these problems that we're having experiencing right now are perfectly normal because we're still very early in the industry, whatever someone says. And we still need to get through that basic education on DAOs, how they operate and what they are, to move forward with building healthy, sustainable, and decentralized DAOs. And tell me, what do you think? Can one wallet, one vote solve this issue and actually be another way to address the whale issue? And whether that's really in the DAO spirit. Um, Me personally, I think that one wallet, one vote is not necessarily a great option and a remedy to whales, because one can have multiple wallets and just use them all to vote on a specific proposal, and then we're back to the same. And again, that one to one vote does not really bring a DAO like environment. I'm curious to hear what you think.
Yes, for instance, I mean, it is not absurd if you think that non-profit entities work like this. Like in associations, for instance, in some countries, the rule one man, one vote is mandatory. You cannot change it. And there is a reason, because like you will find always an outcome which is seen as fair, given that every member accepts the goal of the non-profit entity. But in my opinion, it is not. It cannot be implemented in DAOs, and it is not because I think that governance tokens need to have value or something like this, but because I think that like the value of governance token is also given by governance, and one needs to buy a token not only because it thinks that it can speculate with this token, but also because he wants to participate in governance. So I want to be influential in Bankless. I buy a bank token, and therefore, if you eliminate this weight, then this is something that can impact also the reason why we use governance tokens. There are then some implementations that can help to address the problem. For instance, quadratic voting, Gitcoin is an example that everyone knows. But also in this regard, I mean, there are counter arguments of adopting this kind of vote within the community. And I think that it is fair to have people that count more. What is not good is having a whale that basically goes against the interests of the protocol. And here we need some tools to stop it. I've also published a thread. There was a very interesting situation in Balancer, which is a protocol DAO, where basically there was a whale that was going against the community in putting emissions, BAL emissions, in one gauge, which was not interesting for the community. And there, I think that they arrived to a very good conclusion. At the beginning, they were a bit harsh against the whale, but then they reframed the governance model in order to address this problem. And so I think it's like a bit, I don't know, with flight companies, you don't know exactly which will be the risk of the future, but once you have it in front of you, you need to change your security settings to address this risk.
That's very true. I mean, some of the challenges you can predict, and some of them you can improve on the go and as you experience them. And besides the whale issue, when it comes to centralization in DAOs, another issue that I have experienced are the founders themselves and that founding team or the core team or team representatives, whatever we call them, is that they're giving themselves C-level titles, management titles, and found some fancy titles. And for example, in online interaction with the projects that I worked with, I would meet one, two, three, four, five people from the project, while the community wouldn't be much involved in the communications. And we would get asked, well, how much information do you expect us to share with the community, and how much information you gonna share? How transparent we gotta be, this and that. And also, I mean, I think my favorite is my experience on conferences where I would meet CEOs, CTOs, CMOs of DAOs, literally CTO and CEO of a DAO, especially those that do not have the entity. That happens as well. And when I would ask, why do you call yourself a CEO, a CTO, or a CMO? The answer I would get, well, it's my title. And I would be like, okay, I'm a bit confused. So, what's your experience and what's your take on this type of centralization issues in DAOs?
So I think that it's quite funny, like to use the denominations and titles that we use in regular business for DAOs, and and so like I agree with you. I mean, I understand your critical approach to this type of false DAO. Let's call it like that. And so
Not a DAO if you call it a DAO, right? Like it needs to work
yeah,
like a
because DAO
DAO.
basically means really nothing, and so people try to take advantage also for marketing purposes of this denomination. But then, of course, like if you have a business structure which is completely vertical, then it's hard to me to say that it's a DAO. Said this, I think that also the beginning ethos, the early ethos of saying the DAO is completely horizontal, everyone can step in, step out, and jump in the next one was wrong. I think that some corporate identity is also useful for DAOs, and that in the end, like in every organization of the world, you will have some members that care a bit more, that are always there, that are always more inclined to bring work and value to the DAO, and they need to be recognized by the community. And so I'm not against having roles. Of course, these roles need to be a bit reshaped to fulfill like the ethos of the DAO, and there must be more interventions by the community at large. But I'm not against roles. And
Yeah,
if we give
absolutely.
too much power, it's I mean we know it as legal practitioners. We know that like every system is a system in which you have checks and balances. I don't want to say that I want to transform the DAO in a business, but of course there is like a core group of people that has a recognition by the community, and that deserves to be recognized and have kind of titles, not CEO, not this, this titles, but perhaps something different. What must always remain there is the fact that this group of people is controlled by the community. So if something goes wrong, then the community can always intervene and change the organizational setting.
I agree with you 100%. I mean, there are members that contribute with their skills, with their knowledge, with their time, with their connections, with whatever they have at their disposal to push the project forward and to bring the vision to life. And for that, they should be recognized by the community, get rewarded by the DAO and the community. However, it's extremely important to note that those contributors, those great contributors, do not have any bigger say in the project. They have the same rights as any other community member for the governance established. And I think we also lack that education on the community side, where the community needs to really understand and really needs to learn their role in their power within the project. If someone is bad, if anyone in that contributor team is bad, you can vote. You can put that proposal out, explain whys, right? So you're not the only member in the community that notice certain things. Put that proposal out, put it up for a vote, and get it voted. And if it's voted, kick the bad apple out. And the community really needs to learn that. And that's why I say that we are really still early in the industry, and especially in the DAO space. And it's going to take us some time to learn and to understand how these organizations really operate and what we can do as a community. So, Eagle, I would like to thank you for a great talk, and thank you for being the very first guest on my very first episode of DAO Today. It was a great pleasure talking to you as always, and I'm really looking forward to seeing you in one of the next episodes.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Alexa. It was great also for me. And let's hope to meet soon.
Thanks.
Have a great day.
You too. Bye bye.